The BS Report is a free-flowing conversation that occasionally touches on mature subjects.
First of all,
This is the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
it might be cool, I don't know. And if it's not, I don't
The
care.
BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Bill Simmons works for ESPN. He's also named the sports guy, and he writes a comical sports column. He must be a popular dude.
The BS Report.
It's got a real dirty sound, like a rusty steak knife cutting through a well-aged steak.
Now.
Here's Bill Simmons.
Welcome to the BS Report. Another beautiful sunny day here in Southern California, Monday afternoon. On the line right now, the star of ESPN's baseball coverage, and one of my favorites, a must-read every day, Mr. Buster Olney. What's happening?
Hey, Bill. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming on. I don't know why this hasn't happened sooner. You're on the Subway Fresh Take Hotline, I should mention. Your blog that you do pretty much every day for ESPN.com, unless you're working on a feature or something. I feel like it's a must-read for anybody who's trying to follow the day-to-day inner workings of baseball. But it seems like that would be what time are you getting up every morning to start working on that?
Sometime between usually 4 to 5 o'clock in the morning. Depending on where we are, like in spring training, is usually about 3:30 in the morning because you got to be out the door and really headed to clubhouses at 7 o'clock. But usually try to have it done by 7:15 or so because my daughter gets on the bus at 7:30, so I want to get it done before then.
Jeez. So you basically don't require sleep.
I do, but I grew up on a dairy farm, and then I baked bagels for 2 years, and so getting up early is something I like to do, and I don't have a problem doing it all. And so usually when, I just, when my eyes pop open, I'm ready to go. And it drives my wife crazy because she's someone who could sleep for about 10 hours, and I'm all cheery from the moment that my eyes open.
You sound like my son. I think this is my son's destiny, is to get up at 4 o'clock to work on some sort of blog, because he wakes up at 5:30 every day and he's ready to go. It's not even like, I accidentally woke up today. It's 5:30. I'm ready to start my day. Some people are just wired like that. I'm not wired like that, unfortunately.
No, and it's the biggest tension in my marriage. There's no question about it, because I'm like, hey, what's going on? And she once looked at me and said, so, have you saved the world yet today? Because I'd been up for 3 hours, and she didn't like getting up at 7 o'clock.
You know, it is interesting, though, that there are, if you read about, like, certain CEOs and people like that, some people, that's how they do their day. Like, I think Bob Iger is one of those people. He gets up at 4 or 4:15 every day, and he has like his what he calls his personal time for like 2.5 hours, where he like works out, he catches up on stuff like that, and then by the time everybody else wakes up, he's already gotten all the stuff he needs to do. I wish to God I was like that, but unfortunately,
Peter Angelos, the Orioles owner, is very much like that. He sleeps about 2 or 3 hours a day during the week. He's a very successful lawyer, and he'll go to bed 2 o'clock in the morning, get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. And just be like that for 6 days, and then apparently on Sundays he just collapses on the couch.
Really?
Catches up on some sleep. Because I'll call him on Sunday afternoon sometime, you can tell he just woke up from a nap. But any other time you call him, he's wide awake.
Well, supposedly Jordan and LeBron are wired like that. Like they just can't sleep. And this is why, Jordan would end up at casinos until the wee hours, is because if you're awake for 21, 22 hours a day, how are you going to entertain yourself after a while? Especially if you're Michael Jordan and you can't really, it's not like you go to a movie theater and see a late movie or whatever. So I've always been envious of those people. But now, like with, they're doing all these studies on sleep, and it seems like if you're an athlete, you're really better off getting 8 hours of sleep. Like that's the best amount of hours to get. Is that stuff trickled into baseball at all, this whole sleep analysis stuff?
Well, I don't think there's any question. I don't know if sleep analysis come into it, but I think the one sort of after effect that, and I can't possibly document any of this, but one of the big questions, once baseball put in the rule against amphetamine use, then I would love to know if baseball's had a much lower percentage of alcoholics, of guys, who, because the cycle for years was that guys half hour before the game, they would take amphetamines, and then they'd be completely jacked up after the game, and then they would drink to come down. And you heard so many stories about guys, drinking 4 or 5 till 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. one all-star caliber player. I remember hearing a story about how he drank 24 beers on a East Coast to West Coast flight. You wonder now that they're actually testing for amphetamines if that has come down, the number of guys having problems with that.
I wonder what kind of coffee is drank in the baseball clubhouse and stuff like that, and Red Bull, because 162 games. You would think just the ebb and flow of the everyday life cycle. You would think there are days where it's 12:30 and the game's about to start in a half hour, and you're going to get somebody who's going to throw 97, and you're like, man, I'm tired. I feel sluggish today. You can't really feel sluggish if you're trying to hit the 97-mile-an-hour fastball.
When I was on the beat, and no one was going to completely spell it out for me, but I always know that the Yankee teams that I covered, there were two coffee pots. One was referred to as leaded, and the other was unleaded.
Really?
And I suppose that probably, and I don't know for sure what was in one or the other, but I suppose that one probably might have contained some sort of amphetamine, and the other one didn't. And Tony Gwynn once told me a story about going into a clubhouse, and there was one team in the National League that was renowned among other teams as maybe having the largest amphetamine problem, and there were literally pills spilled all over the carpet of the clubhouse when he walked in. They were coming in following this team on a road trip, and that's just you do wonder if that's something that's changed since the amphetamine testing went in.
Jeez, how good do you feel about the game being clean from PEDs right now on a scale of 1 to 10?
I'd say a 6. I think that there's, I'm sure, something going on that we don't know about. There's certainly, in the last year, you hear more from scouts of, boy, that guy's gotten big, in a way that you did, say, 10 years ago, and sort of with this knowing glance. But no one really knows exactly what's going on. Now, the commissioner of baseball, Bud Selig, came out earlier this year and all but said we could declare the steroid era over. I just don't believe it, because I think there are always players who are going to try to find an edge, and they'll try to find some sort of drugs. And to this day, when you see a jump in someone's offensive statistics, it's the first question that scouts and general managers are asking, in part because they have to invest in these guys. And so I think without a doubt it's cleaner than 10 years ago, when it seemed like, especially amphetamine use, was so open. But I would never say with any confidence that it's cleaned up.
And it does seem like they have drugs out there that you're just not going to catch unless you have the most elaborate testing system you could have. So
that's exactly right. And that's, there's always, the question of, when a guy, comes back from an off-season workout, he put on 20 pounds, who knows? He says he worked out really hard, but who really knows?
I do think that one of the weird side effects from the whole era, which I continue to think was a lot more damaging than some other people think, but I just think it's the way you're conditioned now. As you pointed out, if somebody's powers totals jump, if you see some reliever that you remember seeing last year who threw 92 and now he's hitting 98 or 97, it's like we're constantly detectives watching these games, or at least I feel that way. Every time the Red Sox, because I try to watch every Red Sox game, but every time we have a team that I haven't seen yet, there'll always be one or two guys where I'm like, wow, that guy looks I don't remember that guy looking like that, or wow, I don't remember that reliever having stuff like that. And I guess that's just the way we're conditioned now.
And that's the way that scouts and executives are conditioned now, too, because that's the first thing that they'll wonder when they see a big increase in velocity. And again, presuming that the players are actually being tested, and what exactly is going on, and no one really knows. And there's no doubt that it's an evolution of being a fan now, that you don't necessarily assume that what you're seeing is what it seems to be at face value. That's the way I feel as a reporter too, that a guy has an amazing career, and I get asked, a question on a radio interview, hey, is this guy clean? I don't know, and I'm never going to assume that any player's clean, and that's certainly a lesson learned over the last 20 years.
So you would seriously, at gunpoint, there's not one person you would say, you know what, I believe in this guy, he never did it.
The one guy who I'd be completely shocked, absolutely falling over stunned, would be Derek Jeter.
Me too.
no doubt about it, because of his background. But at the same time, could I sit here and tell you, oh, Derek Jeter's clean? Absolutely not, which is, why the Hall of Fame voting to me is so complicated now.
I would bet on Jeter for the same reasons you said, and also because he's so tight with his parents that he doesn't even want to get involved in, like, baseballs. It's like the fear of disappointment of just wants to be the good son. I just can't imagine him ever being that desperate to look for an edge. I think he would rather retire than do something like that.
And the other thing, too, is the thing about Derek, and part of what I think has made him such a great player, and it's interesting because Jason Hayward, I went and did an interview with him a couple weeks ago. He is the same type of personality. He has a very good sense of who he is, and he always has. And so, when Derek was coming up, and he was, a 300 hitter with 20 homers, there wasn't this big thing of, geez, I want to be the guy who hits 35 homers. I want to be the guy who hits 40 homers. He was always perfectly feeling good about himself as a player, grounding singles through the opposite field. And he wasn't always, trying to become something that he wasn't. And that's clearly, when you're talking about guys like Rafael Palmeiro, Jose Canseco, that seems to have been a thread in why those guys may have been using performance-enhancing drugs.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the two-parent thing. I noticed that with Kevin Durant this weekend. His parents were sitting courtside, and, a mom and a dad saying very supportive, and I think he's probably the most grounded, best teammate, like just all the things you'd want from a young NBA superstar. Do you think are scouts starting to factor that stuff in with if somebody is just from a stable two-parent middle class or lower middle class background like that? That's like a major asset in this day and age.
Huge, absolutely enormous. And in fact, it's interesting. Bryce Harper, who is the presumptive number one pick in this year's draft. One of the things that's probably drawing the most scrutiny about him is, okay, what kind of person is he? How is his family life? What's the influence of his parents? That's part of the reason why in 1992, when Jeter was coming up through the draft, the area scout for the Houston Astros, had the number one pick in the draft that year, was a guy named Harold Newhouser, who won the American League MVP award in 1944 and 45. And he was known to be very understated, and he was writing in block print, report after report saying, you got to take this kid. He has a great parents. He's a great background. You got to take this kid. And when the Astros didn't take him, they took Phil Nevin instead. He resigned his position after 6 years of baseball. He basically walked away. He said, if I can't convince the Astros to take this kid, I'll never be able to convince any team of anything. And without a doubt, that's one of the reasons why the Atlanta Braves, before Jason Hayward came up in the draft in 2007, they were totally pumped about him because they said it seems like he's great parents, great support system. He'll be able to handle all the things that we throw at him, being a young star growing up, having grown up in the Atlanta area.
Yeah, it seems like the whole mindset of how these guys are being scouted is evolving, obviously, but I can't remember character being emphasized like this, and not just in baseball, but. I think you saw it in football. Like, for instance, the Patriots didn't have the greatest locker room last year. And this year they specifically went after character guys. And, they took the Florida co-captains. They took a guy at Rutgers. And I almost wonder, when you talk about, think about, how Moneyball was really about, DAs trying to take advantage of some market inefficiencies. Could we see some inefficiencies where teams are getting bargains with bad character guys, basically?
You wonder. I mean, that I'm sure that's that's part of the equation. As you were talking, I was thinking of two examples of what you're talking about. One, Tim Tebow. I mean, clearly the Broncos are looking at him and saying we're going to try to take advantage of his character and we're going to try to get more value than what other teams see in him. And on the other side, you wonder now if the draft were held today, would a Darryl Strawberry, who came from a broken home, single parent house, a lot of problems, would the New York Mets make the same choice? And there's no question what you're saying is exactly right. The teams are, factoring that in. And teams do take chances on players. You remember when Lastings Milledge came through at the draft that a lot of other teams had questions about Milledge. And right now, a lot of teams have questions about Bryce Harper and his personality. And to the point that I've had other executives, other than the Washington Nationals, basically tell me that they hope the Nationals take him because they don't want to be faced with that decision. But, there'll always be some team willing to take a shot at the guy about whom there are a lot of questions in character.
Well, and then sometimes it'll work out. I think two good examples. Clay Buchholz with the Red Sox, he had the whole laptop thing, and I think he became a little bit of a stay-away pick. And then for the Indians, Lonnie Chisenhall was somebody. Now I think he's one of the best hitting prospects in the American League, but at the time was somebody that fell because he had, I forget what the issue is, but something happened to him in college that team shied away from. But if it seems like if it's like a one-time thing, maybe that's a better risk than somebody that had as many red flags as somebody like Strawberry did. Hey, we had Canseco really for the last generation as the whistleblower. I haven't heard anybody really talk about. There's somebody that could have played in that, 2000 to 2005 range that could potentially be the Canseco of this generation. Do you see that happening or no?
It wouldn't surprise me that if someone were to write a book and basically say, okay, this is what I saw, because there are a lot of guys coming from that generation who are angry about how their generation is perceived as being a bunch of drug users, and I the first guy who jumps to mind, for example, John Kruk, who we work with on Baseball Tonight, and I mean Krucky, when we've had meetings, production meetings, I mean it just makes him mad that it's sort of this broad brush that goes over all the players from that time, and he's not going to be a guy who's going to write a book and tell stories out of school. But I don't think there's any question that that's going to happen. Over the next 10 years, someone will be telling stories about FedEx packages being dropped into lockers and steroids appearing. I think it's a natural evolution that as time goes on, we're going to hear more stories, which is why I thought the Mitchell report was a complete. The idea that they were going to get all of the truth was a laugh from to begin with, because how insulated the clubhouses can be, how players are not going to talk for the most part about their teammates, and it wound up that 86 names get thrown out there, but there are many, many, many untold stories.
Yeah, and when you've been dealing with these guys for 30 years, a lot of baseball players, not rocket scientists, and you think like it's doing a steroid cycle or doing HGH or any of this stuff. It's not the easiest thing to pull off. Like, you have to stick to a day-to-day thing. You have to know what to use. You basically almost all the time you're going to need help. You're going to need that one person who's kind of like Kurt Radomski?
Radomski, yeah.
Yeah. Kind of, you need that guy to kind of walk you through it. Like, for instance, Manny Ramirez, there's no way I feel like he could ever have pulled off any sort of anything by himself. So it seems like those guys would be the candidates, those kind of fringe guys that aren't really involved in the league, to just 5-6 more books, coming from that genre.
I always thought that, I always compared it to, if you imagine that, a teenager going across the border to Tijuana, looking for a prostitute.
Yeah.
That's kind of the way baseball players were with steroids.
Right.
They don't know exactly what they're trying to get, and they don't know exactly what they were going to get, but they just had in mind what they wanted. And maybe the best example of that, during the Palco testimony, Jeremy Giambi was asked in the grand jury about, okay, well, how did you know that you were going to be okay using these performance-enhancing drugs? That's not the exact question. I'm obviously paraphrasing.
Yeah.
His answer was, well, Jason did it and didn't kill him. And I thought that absolutely summed up the use of steroids by baseball players to me during that time. I don't think they were sophisticated in a way that I think that the NFL players were much more sophisticated and may even still, to a degree be. I don't know. But I just didn't think they were that far advanced in how they use the stuff.
Yeah, and you think it was 15, 16 years. It's kind of amazing that we never had like a tragedy or some sort of like crazy road rage incident, anything. It was a pretty benevolent time for the most part. I don't remember, like, you'd think there would have been one guy who would have just fought 4 reporters, just got like snapped. None of that stuff really happened. We kind of got out of it. What do you think was the heyday if you had to pick? Because my pick would be 2002, 2003 feels to me like that was the glory years for just everybody doing everything.
You know what? I would totally agree with you. I think that's when the pitchers were really catching up. They had caught up, and there was a story that I remember hearing from one manager who told me about an all-star pitcher who showed up in his camp, and he was a guy who was known for not being a heavy worker, and he cut his sleeves off on his shirt, and he went out there with the sleeveless look just to show off his guns. And you know, for this manager, that was like the moment of the Wild Wild West. It was like, would you please put a shirt on? And there's a story about, you know, another All-Star at the All-Star game actually going through the clubhouse with his shirt off, his back completely covered with acne, and another player, you know, threw a shirt at him. So just don't be so obvious about it. I mean, it really were absolutely cavalier about it. And, you know, in 2005, I once did a story on Wally Joyner, who told me about how his very, very brief use of steroids, he took 2 pills, actually, and he just walked over to Ken Caminiti, who was his teammate, who he knew, you know, had been using this stuff, and he said, hey, you know, that thing we talked about, can you get me some? The next day, there was a FedEx package in his locker. I mean, it's that prevalent and that open and that accessible to the players.
Well, what do you do? You know, not all the names have come out, and we both know there are guys out there who, you know, the general public has no idea that, or maybe little to no idea. What do you do when those guys come on a Hall of Fame ballot? What do you do personally?
That's exactly the question that I asked, you know, a lot of my colleagues. I vote for McGuire every year, and I will vote for Clemens, and I will vote for Bonds. And I always pose this question to other reporters who say that they're never going to vote for these guys. I said, okay, you're not going to vote for McGuire. I understand that. What about player A, B, C, D, and E, who we all know almost certainly did this stuff, and the only difference between those guys and Mark McGuire was that Mark McGuire happened to be the teammate of Jose Canseco.
Right.
And that's the only difference between them, and you can't, you know, I say this to writers, you can't in good conscience vote for player A, B, C, D, and E when you know darn well it was the exact same situation. And that's why I feel like if you can't determine exactly who did what, you better just set the steroid question aside, especially because baseball really set the steroid question aside for 15 years and judge them, you know, just, you know, according to how they measured up against their peers.
Yeah. And I've written about this. You know, I think out of all the sports, especially because it's been around for so long, baseball has eras, and it's just the way it is. And each era is distinct for whatever reasons. In this case, pretty sure most of these guys were doing something, most of the big guys, and it's really hard to separate all of them. And if a lot of them had the same advantages from whatever chemicals, you know, I think that just factors in. It's no different than the pitcher's mound being screwed up in the 60s and things like that. And I just don't know how you have a Hall of Fame without Barry Bonds. Just put it on his plaque. Just say, hey, this guy, you know, he did all these things, and also we think that he did this and he was involved in this scandal, whatever. Like, it's supposed to be a place where we learn about baseball. How does Barry Bonds not make the Hall of Fame under that criteria?
Totally agree with you. You know, I've gone back through the record book since '87, and just, you know, best guesstimate on my part, which is hardly, you know, 100% proof, but just based on conversations with players, and tried to determine sort of, okay, which awards were won with the use of performance-enhancing drugs. And my guess is that 75% of the awards since '87 were won with the use of performance-enhancing drugs. And I totally agree with what you said. I think the Hall of Fame should just put it on the plaque. Like, there isn't anything hard yet on Bonds, and who knows if he ever actually has a trial, you know, what you could put on there. But, for example, with Mark McGuire, with Alex Rodriguez, you could just write on McGuire's plaque, 583 career homers, set the single-season home run record in 1998 with 70. In 2010, admitted to using performance-enhancing drugs, and let the patrons of the Hall of Fame decide. And on top of that, I don't even think sports writers should be involved in the voting. You know, it's not really my place to determine what, you know, Mark McGuire's legacy is or what Roger Clemens' legacy is. I think that's really for the patrons of the Hall of Fame and for baseball fans. I'm
so glad you brought this up, because LeBron James just did not win the MVP unanimously in basketball because of a system that the NBA has where basically each city gets 3 votes. So, Dwight Howard ended up getting 3 MVP votes for first place, and they came from a guy who was an Orlando Magic broadcaster, a guy who is a writer for the Orlando Magic website, and a columnist who writes basketball who once wrote for the Orlando Sentinel and now writes for AOL. So those are his 3 first-place votes. I just don't understand in 2010 when we have all these different methods and it's the Internet, so collaborative, like how this is the system. Why can't, to me, the best system is the Football Hall of Fame where they put the 40 guys in a room. I think you have ex-coaches, you got ex-players, you get writers, you have all different types of people, and they actually hash it out, and they try to come up with some sort of consensus. Why couldn't that work for baseball?
I think it should, and I wish the Hall of Fame would step in and make that happen, and I wish the baseball writers weren't involved in the Hall of Fame voting. Really, one simple premise. We shouldn't be voting on something that we're covering. Imagine if you had a Capitol Hill reporter, on one hand reporting on healthcare legislation, also filing a vote. That makes no sense. And I wish we were taken out of the system entirely, but I'm sure that will never happen. For the Hall of Fame every year, all this conversation we have about the Baseball Hall of Fame vote is a good thing for the Hall of Fame. It's something I know that most members of the Baseball Writers Association find to be something they really like to do and like to be involved in. But I got to say, especially as the steroid issue has blossomed, it makes me really uncomfortable. You sort of struggle. You want to step up and not vote, but then that seems like you're just calling attention to yourself when, the voting body as a whole is always going to be involved. And it's just something I wish the Hall of Fame would step in and take care of on their own.
Do like MVP, Rookie of the Year, stuff like that? Does that stuff drive you crazy or you don't care? Because for me, for some reason, it always drives me nuts.
Well, I don't like it when we see. It's a little bit different because I think the Hall of Fame and the MVP award stuff a little bit different because the Baseball Writers Association, does that's their award. The Hall of Fame voting is not the Baseball Writers Award, but the Cy Young, MVP, Rookie of the Year, that's our award. And what does bother me is when there's clearly very inconsistent standards used. And obviously, you as a Red Sox fan are going to remember the most notorious example of that. Pedro Martinez should have been the most valuable player award. It should have won that award in 1999. And he didn't because he wasn't listed on a ballot of one of the New York writers. And that was really not good for us, I think, as an association among the writers. I think it didn't make us look good. Yeah,
I was fine with him not winning the MVP because I think we could spend 4 hours arguing about whether a pitcher should ever win that award, whether a pitcher could ever be more valuable than somebody who plays day in and day out for 6 months. But to not put him on the ballot that's a whole other level of whatever. You know what I mean?
Well, and when you have some writers saying it's okay to vote for pitchers and some saying it's not, establish a standard and stick to it and try to come up with something there. It's in some ways it's a little bit. It's like the fact that a lot of writers are putting so much weight into the character issue and the Hall of Fame thing, and other voters don't put any into it. And you wish that there was some way that you could create a standard that people can follow as opposed to having so many loose ends.
Maybe for baseball you should create, because everybody. You're probably one of the 2 or 3 most liked people in baseball journalism. Maybe you should create your own little Buster Olney panel. Get your 15 people and just make it like, well, here's the real votes. Here are the 15 people that I can guarantee aren't biased in any way and put real thought into this, and we hashed it out, and here are our awards. I think you should do this.
The Madden, like Madden's awards.
Yeah, the Buster Awards. You have to have 14 people that you trust totally, right? Who follow baseball all the time?
Oh, no doubt. But I can see the players looking at the Buster Award. Okay, dude, lighten up.
It's a great one. I'd like to see the trophy for the Buster Awards. Moving from the steroids to what's happening this season, because I think they're connected. The Tampa Bay Rays, as everybody was couldn't figure out how to, what kind of rosters to assemble during this weird era, they just went for athletes. And now it's paying off, and it seems like teams are now trying to emulate them, but it's almost like they had a 2 or 3 year advantage with this stuff. And you look at this team, I'm not sure, I can't remember the last time I've seen a baseball team like this where you felt like they had specific athletic advantages. When was the last time you remember seeing a team like this?
98 Yankees, and a team that I covered. They remind me so much of that team because there's this sense of absolute relentlessness. And it actually, I grew up a Laker fan, and the Showtime Lakers, they just would come at you with that fast break. And I mentioned that to some of the people on the Baseball Tonight show, and then that night we had Carl Crawford on, the Rays left fielder, and asked him about the team, and he said, you know what? We always talk about wanting to be like the Phoenix Suns. We're just run. That's exactly how it feels when you watch them play. And the comparison I make to the '98 Yankees is, there was just, on that group of players, there was just feeling every day they're just coming at you. And I'm sure, as a fan of the Red Sox, you probably relate. When you play them, it's like, how do you stop that?
It was horrible.
Every guy seems to go first to third or can steal second, constantly putting pressure on. There was a pitcher who walked over to the Rays in the last couple of weeks as they were stretching, and he looked over to the players and said, I hate facing you guys because you're always running.
Yeah. And you're just on your heels. The Red Sox played them for 4 very unfortunate days a couple weeks ago. And by Monday, I was ready to see them leave town, especially because, this is another thing. We were talking about the amphetamines and stuff before, but poor John Lackey, who's been on West Coast time the last 10 years of his life, or 9 years, however long, and now is pitching the Patriots Day game at 10 in the morning East Coast time. What were the odds that he was going to get shoved? But anyway, this Red Sox team built on pitching and defense kind of forgot about the catching position in that whole thing. It's a little weird. They forgot about probably the most key defensive part other than shortstop you could put on the field, and they kind of skimped over that. Nightmare.
Yeah. I kind of wonder if, and I thought about this, that Theo Epstein, who is, I think among all the, the general managers of the power teams in baseball, he strikes me as being the guy who would look at his teams with arm's length, eyes wide open more than any of them. In other words, he's going to make a very honest evaluation, even to the point of maybe being a little too negative, if that's the right word.
Yeah.
And I was thinking during that series that Theo would probably look at that and say, you know what, we're just not good enough. We're looking at the team that may be the best team in baseball, and we know how good the Yankees are, and we know how far we have to go. And I wonder if the Red Sox bad start, if they don't make up any ground in the next couple of weeks, if that's going to make it easier for Theo just to say, turn the page. You know what? We're just not nearly as good as those teams are. Now, there's no question that, the Red Sox, as they make this transition into trying to get into a sleeker team, a better defensive team, they had, coming off last year, 4 or 5 positions to address. I think they hoped that they could get through the year without having catching being a big issue, but that just didn't happen. And you wonder now, Victor Martinez, if we have some insight into why the Red Sox didn't offer him a multi-year deal before the season started.
Yeah, and I still think I like what they did. I'll stand by it because I think it was a transition year, and they tried to catch the old market inaccuracies thing again, inefficiencies, whatever, and they figured we're going to put a good defensive team in the field with good pitching, and maybe this will work for this year. I don't think they had 100% confidence. The one mistake, I think, was going too media heavy on what they were doing. It got people excited and actually kind of swung Red Sox fans like me, who was on the fence and wondering why they just didn't sign Johnny Damon, because I know that he's going to have good at-bats and that's somebody I can trust in October. They kind of swung me over to their side with the sabermetrics and look at this, we got this guy, now we have the top defender here and the second best guy here and all that stuff. But then you actually watch this team. The personality doesn't really seem like it's there. Athletically, they're not there. And just watching the Rays and the Yankees, I feel like the season's over. I hate to press the panic button, but I'm watching an 85 to 90 win team. I don't see any way they win more than that. Do you see any way they come back?
As they're currently constructed, unless the Rays or the Yankees suffer major injuries, I don't. And I think actually the Red Sox will have a pretty good idea in the next 3 weeks, because after they play this 4-game series against the Angels, which is not, as you know, they're not a good team. But after that, 16 of the next 19 games are against the Yankees, the Rays, the Twins, the Tigers, and the Phillies.
Yeah.
So in 3 weeks, I think Theo Epstein will have a pretty clear idea whether or not his team's good enough. I don't think they are. It's interesting. In talking with Red Sox people in spring training, they believed coming out of spring that the Rays were the best team in Florida. And I think everything that they've done since then, the fact that David Price has taken a big step forward, Wade Davis has taken a big step forward, And oh, by the way, they have these two great prospects lined up in the minor leagues whenever a hole develops, and Jeremy Hellickson and Desmond Jennings. I mean, they are loaded. And I actually think that, looking back on it, when you as a Red Sox fan get to November, December, the fact that, they may be buried in a hole early in the year might turn out to be a good thing for this team, because it'll allow them to sort of take that clear-eyed view of, okay, we're going to transition, and we're not going to pour paint down a hole to try to save a season. It's probably not going to work out.
I agree with you. And, some of the worst moves that this team has made over the course of my lifetime were panic trades in June and July based on the fact that people were freaking out. And I think, we could have potentially gotten into a situation this year where they severely overpaid for somebody like Gonzalez, who I still don't understand why the Padres would trade him, but somebody of that ilk to try to salvage whatever was happening with the season. Hopefully this year, if they won't do that. It's weird though. This is the first Red Sox season since 1997 when Aaron Seeley was our opening day starter, and pretty much people knew from the first game things weren't going to turn out well. This is the first year we've had in 13 years that by the end of May, the Red Sox just might be out of it, because I think the Rays and the Yankees are going to win 100 plus. Do you agree with that?
No question. And you do wonder again. Theo has to play the role of general manager, and he also has to play the role of ticket seller. If Theo had a sense of that already, because what was the phrase he used in December? The bridge.
Yep.
And I think that was an absolutely honest assessment at that time. And you're right. In the aftermath of that, we heard more about the defense and pitching, and could they work? I mean, let's face it, the pitching hasn't been nearly as good as everyone thought. What are they, 23rd in staff ERA, I think, as you and I talk. And they need to be in the top 5 for this equation to work. And
a couple of things a couple dangerous things. Beckett, although he finally looked okay this weekend, but just didn't look sharp. And, when they signed him to that extension, I'm not sure that his fastball is the same out pitch that it once was, and I have no idea if the stats back that up or not. Classic old school baseball medium ever, just throw a crack up. But at the same time, it doesn't seem like he makes people swing and miss like he once did. And these Yankee starts that he has, this is a 3-4 year pattern now where they just bleed him and they bleed him and they bleed him, and he's out of the game by the 6th inning. I'm not sure I would have signed him to that extension. And I also, what's the worst thing that could happen if you wait 2 months? Why do you think they signed him when they did?
Well, I think they probably, looking at the market this fall, I mean, first off, if you wanted to trade your life for somebody else, maybe right now the life to trade for would be the agent for Cliff Lee, because right now he looks like he's going to be a complete island unto himself where the free agent market is. The best guys on the market this fall, besides Lee, we thought were going to be Brandon Webb, who hasn't thrown a pitch, Jorge De La Rosa, who's hurt and is not going to be in position to pitch, Javier Vazquez, who's obviously been a disaster so far for the Yankees. And I think if Beckett had been out there, if he had a 15, let's say in 2010 he went unsigned, he went 15-10 with a 3.6 ERA, 3.8 ERA, he would have gotten 4 years at 68 easy.
Okay. So you're saying they played the odds?
I think they played the odds, and on top of that, I'll just tell you this, that in terms of his start, I've heard this from 3 different evaluators from 3 different teams, and what you said, I mean, you try to find scouts who are fair and don't have agendas. Every single one of them told me the same thing. He gets hard-headed when runners get on base. He tries to overpower hitters with his fastball, and in doing that, he lost the feel in the first month of his secondary stuff. He hasn't been able to throw his curveball with the same type of depth as he normally does. So I do think there's a good chance Beckett's going to bounce back. Now, I don't think the Red Sox are going to win the division, but I think Beckett's going to be better.
There was an amazing stat before this game. His stats for his first 4 or 5 starts, I can't remember, in 2009 and 2010 were basically exactly the same. Like exactly. They to like within a third of an inning and Ks and stuff like that. So maybe it is a good sign. I'm not feeling optimistic. Who do you think? So we got Rays, we got the Yanks. It seems like I think the Phillies are going to get there. Wait, if you had to rank a top 5, would you say the league's a little top heavy this year?
Yeah, and I mean every year we always talk about the dominance of the American League. You feel that. I think the Twins are a really good team, especially because Liriano now gives them that one starting pitcher that they lacked in the playoffs last year, a guy who can beat good hitters and can miss bats. That is a huge thing for them. Obviously Roush doing what he's doing. And if you're talking about like one team for growth, and let's face it, if the Texas Rangers were in the American League East, we wouldn't even be talking about them. But they play in this very mediocre division, and they do have a lot of room for growth because they have so many good young players. The Giants are an interesting team to me because they have this dominant starting pitching. Now that Jonathan Sanchez, in the aftermath of his no-hitter, seems to have taken a big step forward. And Barry Zito has figured out how to not beat himself up and not, try to throw 100 miles an hour when he knows he can only throw 85 miles per hour. That's a really deep rotation. And you kind of wish that you hope that the Giants make the playoffs to get into a short series because that would be a fascinating dynamic because they're so poor offensively. Could they work it out just based on those 3-4 good starting pitchers?
Well, of anyone, and especially, I'd never have thought that the Giants fans got enough credit for being tortured and for having horrible things happen for them. And also, what a great baseball city that is. I think the Giants-Dodgers rivalry is much better than I realized before I moved out here. If they're close at all, isn't it the classic team that would make a couple panic trades in July? Or not panic trades, but just really make a push for it.
No doubt about it. And they've got this kid, Buster Posey, playing in the minor leagues, and he'll be up presumably sometime in midseason. A team that invested $126 million in Barry Zito, gave Edgar Renteria a 2-year, $18 million deal when most other teams would have only given him a 1-year deal at most. No question about it. They'll be aggressive to try to solidify their position.
I have a right fielder for them. Do you know who it is?
J.D. Drew?
Yeah. I think we can make a deal work. Maybe. A little JD to the Giants for a couple prospects. Then we'll bring Josh Reddick up. This will be good. I've just about had it with JD. It's nothing personal. I know the stats are good, but it's definitely the most, I don't want to say unlikable, but not a lot to like with this Red Sox team. I need guys. Hey, you know what I'm talking about? There's an intangible that you want with your team. Where you want to feel like they have some sort of common identity. There's a personality. There's something, and this team just feels like it was put together in a science lab to some degree.
Well, and let's face it too. It's clear that for a lot of their core guys, the best days are behind them. And Terry Francona is getting a lot of flack now because of choices he makes. I can't imagine a tougher job in baseball managing right now than Francona has because he walks in every day. And he's got this core of great, guys who were great at one time, and he has to look them in the eye, 2 or 3 of them, and say, sorry, you're not playing today. Tim Wakefield, I'm sorry. We need to keep the high-ceiling young pitcher in the rotation, so you're going to the bullpen, and Clay Buchholz is in the rotation. David Ortiz, you were great, but I'm sorry, you can't be in the lineup anymore. J.D. Drew, I'm sorry. You were a great player for us in 2007, but it's just not happening right now. I think it was, Sparky Anderson who once said there's nothing tougher to manage than an aging star, and Francona's got 5 of them.
Yeah.
And that's not an easy situation. It's not going to get easier until they start turning over the roster.
You have this was always one of my favorite things about your blog is teams in baseball, when teams clean house, they like to do it. They like to do 3-4 moves at once. And I think Seattle just did it. You had it in today. About, Seattle's shaking things up. They waived Eric Burns, and they're doing a whole bunch of other things. It feels like when the Red Sox are ready to do that, it's going to be multiple moves at the same time. Would you agree?
The Godfather?
Yeah, it's going to be Wakefield's off the team, Ortiz, you're released, J.D. Drew, you're benched against whoever, and it'll be 4 or 5 moves at once to kind of dilute the impact of each individual move. I think that's what they end up doing.
I totally agree with you, and it wouldn't surprise me if that's something that's coming. I mean, when you look at Ortiz had a couple of homers over the weekend, and maybe he'll take off in the way that he did last year. I have a lot of question about that because you watch his at-bats, and every pitcher's working off the same book now, just pound him in. But, I've kind of wondered how they were how they would handle that when that day came, and I totally agree with you. I think it's going to be a situation where Theo's going to move fast, and we saw the comments. I don't know if you saw the Herald today, but basically Theo came out and said, this team is not playing well, they're not playing smart, and I think that day's coming when you're going to have multiple hits on the same day.
I also think the day's coming, this is amazing, but this is just how Boston works, where people start pointing at Theo a little bit here. If it's not, I know it's happened a little bit on the radio stations already, but, they won in 04 and 07, you're supposed to have the 5-year grace period, but who knows? Boston, we're so entitled now with having a good team that it's going to be interesting to see how really everybody reacts to this. Give me your 5 guys. If I have DirecTV and I am a baseball fan, but I just watch my own team pretty much all the time, give me 5 guys I have to flip over to just kind of watch right now.
Jason Hayward, without a doubt, is number one because, first off, he's going to be a guy that we're going to be talking about for the rest of our lives. He's an unbelievable talent. He's a great kid. And his plate discipline is something you never see in a young player. So to watch him in his at-bats, in his progression, it's amazing stuff, and take that opportunity. I mean, right now he's on a pace in his rookie year, did 47 homers and drive in 154 runs.
Good Lord.
Now, I love watching Lincecum pitch because as his fastball velocities come down, he's lost about 2 to 3 miles off his fastball since he came into the big leagues. He just has become such a rounded pitcher. You know, he's this phenomenal changeup that he throws, whether you call it a changeup or a splitter or whatever he's calling it, and his curveball, and he's just, you know, a lot of fun to watch. And, you know, I like watching Liriano this year because you know sort of the road that he had to take back early in spring training. I remember talking to Rick Anderson, the Twins pitching coach, and he said he's got it back. You know, he's got that depth on the slider back, and he felt like there was a chance that he was going to turn the corner. I covered Trevor Hoffman when he broke into the big leagues as a closer, actually right after he was traded from the Marlins to the Padres in 93 and 94. I've known him for a long time, and I love watching him pitch because you know how competitive he is, and he's trying to make it work. And right now, he's struggling with that. He's trying to refine that combination. I can't tell you how many times I've heard from scouts, I just don't think he has it. And along those lines, the fifth guy that I always love to watch is Jamie Moyer, because you cannot figure out how a guy that throws 81 miles per hour always manages to trick hitters. And last night he won his 262nd game. In 1995, he was taken out of the Orioles rotation when I was covering the Orioles, and I remember him coming out and talking to us after that decision. And I remember literally thinking, as I'm looking at this guy, thinking, Jamie, you're a nice guy. Why don't you just hang it up? It's over. And you're the last guy to realize. You know, I just couldn't believe that Jamie just didn't see what we all saw, that his career was pretty much over, and that was like 200 wins ago.
Well, at what age does he need to reach before this becomes like one of the 5 or 6 most incredible sports stories of our lifetime? Like, what if he gets to 50 and he's still doing this?
I think he is now, to be honest with you. And I, you know, last year when I think, or maybe it was right after when when Randy Johnson won his 300th, I emailed Mike Messina and asked him, okay, among the current pitchers, who do you think could win 300? And, of course, I completely ignored Moyer, who had like 245 wins at that time. And he emailed me, he said, don't underestimate Moyer, because he's not really going to be any different at age 50 than he is now.
So how many does he have now?
He has 262 victories.
Wow. So he really could. That would be the most amazing 300-game winner, I think, of all time.
I think he wasn't even really relevant until he was like 32 years old.
Yeah, somebody who's never been drafted within the first 10 rounds of a fantasy draft, probably ever.
Even today, if you were to ask people, would you take a shot at him? Of course, the answer would be no, because when he gets hammered, it's cover your eyes bad.
Yeah.
Last night, or early in the game, David Wright hits a bomb off him. You're like, oh boy, it's going to be that type of outing. And then the 5th inning, he's carrying a lead.
Yeah. Well, you know, this is why I can't give up on Wakefield yet, because I do feel it's a similar thing. When they're bad, they look horrendously bad, like you think their career's ending as you're watching the game. Then they'll have these little 5-6 streaks, you know. And Wake hasn't had one of those yet, but as somebody who's watched him forever, I feel like, you know, if the Red Sox did cut him loose, I think he's somebody that could potentially help a contender. But do you think, like, with the, you know, so much is changing now with diets and just this sleep diaries and all this kind of different stuff, it isn't that inconceivable that a pitcher could go to 50. It's just we haven't seen it yet.
And he could do it. You know, part of it is when I covered Jamie on that Oriole team in '95. I mean, every afternoon he was running 5 miles. And then he got a knee problem, and now he swims every day. When I see him at 8:30 in the morning in spring training when I go to the Phillies camp, his hair's always wet because he just came from working out in the pool. He's a workout maniac. And he also, the thing about him is he absolutely believes that he can control a game throwing 81 miles per hour. He's the only pitcher I've ever heard do this, change speeds in this way. Most pitchers change speeds with their grip. They bury the ball in their palm. He changes speeds with his legs, which seems so ridiculously simple, but I've never heard any pitcher talk about this. Rather than drive off the mound, he falls off the mound. And his explanation to me was, they can't look at my legs, so they have no idea when I'm doing it. So he's going from 81 to 71 miles per hour. And with that type of mentality, yeah, maybe he could go to 50. Would I bet against it? Absolutely. But, I bet against him 15 years ago.
2 more quick questions, and then I'll let you go because you have to do 45 other things for the worldwide leader. Number 1, are they ever going to do anything to speed up these games?
Well, I don't think that they will. I think they try, but the bottom line is that they have to rely on the umpires to be the enforcers, and that puts them in a difficult position. And it's clear that, the hitters, it's human nature. The hitters are closer to the umpires than the pitchers are, so the hitters often control the pace of the game, and that'll never change unless they get the umpires absolutely to become policemen, and they won't.
There's no way we could have a rule that once you go in the batter's box, you're there for the rest of the at-bat.
Well, then what happens when the hitter says, I have something in my eye?
Then make them do that. Then you have to be like, hold on 1 second, my contact.
A bug. It's another bug. It's a midge.
I just can't believe how long these games are. These Red Sox games, and, granted, we have probably the pitching staff that takes the longest between pitches in the history of baseball. Somehow we've assembled, even the relievers take a long time. But I don't have 4 hours to watch a Red Sox game. I've found that I'm TiVoing these games and now zooming through them and trying to bang them out in an hour over watching them live because it's just not fun to watch a 4-hour baseball game. Who enjoys this?
Well, and that's why, you saw that in that one series, when the Red Sox-Yankee series, when Angel Hernandez and Joe West basically tried to enforce the rules. It didn't surprise me because those are like the two umpires who have no problem being difficult with players.
Yeah.
But that's the type of personality you have to have, and you know what? Most of them don't.
All right, last question. So you do a lot of TV from your house. You got one of I forget, what are those cameras called? The special camera? So a
glow point. You need to get a glow point.
No, they've wanted me to, and I don't want one because I'd be getting called, hey, come on ESPN News in 5 minutes. You have the glow point. You have to go on. So I've been fighting it. But where is it, in your office?
It's in my home office, yes.
So do you have to put up something behind you?
They have a pull-down screen, a pull-down ESPN screen, and, they have 2 cabinet doors that open up in the camera. They do all the adjusting of the camera and that type of thing from Bristol.
So all you do is they say, you're coming on. Yep. Put on a jacket and a tie. We don't care if you have pants on, and pull that thing down, and we're going to you in 5 minutes.
That's pretty much the case.
So you're like a microwave. You heat up. You're like a microwave burrito.
I tell people all the time, you feel like you're a veterinarian on call.
How much? What's the least amount of notice you've gotten to get thrown on in front of the glow point?
Oh, steroid stuff. When that stuff is broken, I'd say within 3 or 4 minutes.
Really?
Oh, yeah, because what they'll do is they have to dial in from this remote place, and as fast as I get on a coat and tie, that's how fast you go on TV.
And your wife is never like, oh my God, with this glow point, I'm going to break this thing.
My greatest fear, without a doubt, we have a 5-year-old son, and I can't tell you how many times I thought, you know what, Jake is going to come in on national television at age 5 because there are a lot of times he just ignores, like all 5-year-olds, ignores what Lisa and I tell him. And I swear there's going to be a show where you're suddenly going to see the back of the head of this curly blonde-headed kid come in and say, Dad, Disney wouldn't let me play the game.
I can't wait. Well, it'll be a sports blog staple the next day. Buster's kid interrupts.
I really fear it.
Well, I know every time I do a podcast, my kid stares at me through the window of the door trying to get in because I lock it. But she would love nothing more than to interrupt podcasts. They don't understand the concept of working from the house, really. And why would they? They're 5. What do they know?
That's exactly right. No question about it. And Jake does not respect those boundaries. I've probably had 10 radio interviews that I've done where he's come in and asked me a question. I'm literally running away from him. I've run out the door to try to get away from Jake, because I know he's coming in with some issue that's really important to him at that moment, and I can't possibly explain to him, Dad's on the radio.
What's the latest TV hit that you've done where we've seen you?
1 a.m. I did, it was during, I think it was after the McGuire stuff, after the McGuire confession. They had me on pretty much, in that type of situation, you're on from the beginning right to the end of the thing.
Do you do a little touch-up, or you just go on cold? A little makeup touch-up?
No, you definitely, because you have directors in Bristol who will say, you're looking kind of shiny, go put some stuff on.
Oh, so you have makeup. Buster only has makeup in his house.
I have makeup, and it's my wife who goes and purchases it for me,
This is great.
I just feel, I don't feel good about going and buying the makeup. My wife buys it for me.
What kind of shade do you use?
Does 30 mean anything to you?
Sure.
That's what the makeup people in Bristol told me. Get a 30. Whatever 30 is, that's my color, which is probably very light.
That's great. So you put on a little 30, throw in the tie and the jacket. Pants don't matter. You could have pajama bottoms. Doesn't really matter. And then you just go on.
Probably there have been times when I've had pajama bottoms on. You're exactly right.
Well, I am never getting the Glow Point camera for all the reasons we just talked about for the last 5 minutes. But congrats on everything. You're the hardest working man at ESPN. Indispensable part of my mornings. And I don't know why you haven't been on the podcast sooner, but it was a pleasure.
Well, I appreciate it, Bill. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Talk to you soon.
So I get the sign off. Whoa!
Thank you for downloading the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Too much fun.
Check out